Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. Welcome to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity. I am very, very pleased that you're all here with me today. We've got an amazing guest in store for you today who I want to get to as quick as possible. So let's get started, of course, with my blog post from a couple of years ago. And this one is entitled Entrainment is Key to Embodying a New Way of Being. There are times when we look to improve ourselves, to do better at something, or to just feel better about our life. We can face many challenges to get there. Often, we just don't know how to do it, how to change our behavior to make new decisions. We may find ourselves in unknown or unfamiliar territory, not quite sure which way to turn or what to do. It is unsettling to be there, so we look for a map or a guide who can show us the way, perhaps a coach or a therapist, or even a facilitator of some kind, because we need a direction or guidance to find our way. One tool that can help us is to find someone who has already done what we seek to do. A person who is just a few steps or many ahead of us. They may have already embodied a new way of being and can stand as an example for us to follow. It takes lost my train of thought. Yet what we really need to do is to entrain to their energy, to align with the feeling they emit. While this may sound easy, it is far from it, for it takes focus, energy, and attention to break the habit of being ourselves and embody a new way of being, to allow ourselves to be molded into a new you. Entrainment happens on a cellular or nervous system level, not in our conscious minds, for it is a much more subtle process. Certain exercises or practices can help and support the change. Yet in order to fully align to the new way of being, we have to shift on a very fundamental level. Sometimes we don't have someone to directly work with, so we need to find a character, an archetype, or a role model of some kind. Regardless of who it is, to have that example of how to embody a new way of being is essential. If we don't have one at the moment, we keep looking until we find them. And they may turn up in the most unexpected of places. Being open and aware is key to this process. For once we have our model to follow and we have embodied their example, we can now grow beyond it. And soon we will be entraining others, and so the cycle continues. Do you have someone to model and train to? So I wrote this a couple of years ago while I was working with a friend of mine who's a spiritual teacher, and she talked about entrainment. And we had this whole big discussion around this, and it kind of brought up to me this whole idea of that we all entrain to something or someone. We entrain to our parents as children. We entrain to our friends as we're growing up. We entrain to bosses and coaches and facilitators and people in our lives. And usually we do it on a very unconscious level. We're not even aware we're doing it. And this is kind of why, like, as children, we always think, oh, I'm never going to be anything like my parents when I grow up. And then the older we get, the more we're exactly like our parents because we've been trained to them at an early age. But to kind of to grow, to change, to become something more than what we're used to being, we can entrain to someone else who's being a different way. And oftentimes, somebody who we look up to, a mentor, a coach, an advisor, a facilitator, we look at how do they show up? Who are they being when they're in the room with us? And if it feels right to our body and we feel safe with them and our nervous system can relax enough to allow us to take in this information of how they're being, we can then adapt that to ourselves. And we're never going to be exactly like someone else. We're never going to, have the exact same mannerisms and do things the exact same way. But there's an energy to how people show up. There's an energy to those habits, those I don't know what I'd call them, the habits, the to the actions they take. And it's that energy we connect with. And it's that energy that we are learning to adapt ourselves. And so when we do it consciously, when we say to ourselves, oh, I really love the way this person, talks in front of an audience, or the way that they, work with clients, or the way they work with people who are coming to them for healing sessions. And then we consciously feel into their energy and feel into the way they're being in life. And we remember that feeling and cultivate that feeling within ourselves. We can entrain to it. We can adapt it as our own. And then before we know it, we're not only have we sort of taken on those skills in a way, but we've surpassed them because we've made them their own. It combines with who we are already as individuals, and it creates something new, something different. Maybe better, maybe not. Who knows? But it's about being conscious about what we're in training to. And so often in life, we're exposed to so much. We're very unconscious about what we entrain to. This is why, people end up, kids in inner cities can end up in gangs so easily. They entrain to the other gang members unconsciously, and before they know it, they're in it too deep to get out. Or maybe a member of a sports team entrains to their fellow teammates. There's so many different ways this can happen. And if we don't actually have a physical person that we feel like, oh, I really want to entrain the way they are, maybe there's a historical figure. Maybe there's a myth, a legend, an archetype, uh, something that has a very strong power to it that we can just feel it and we get it because we've read about it and we've seen it in movies and we've experienced it, that even that archetype we can entrain to. So it's not the kind of thing that just happens overnight. It takes time, and the more we're aware of what it is we're doing, the more we do it intentionally, the faster we can adapt this new energy. And the more embodied we are in our physical self, the more we can tap into that energy and really feel it and cultivate that feeling within ourselves. So, my invitation for this week, should you choose to accept it, is to think about what aspect would you like to grow or change about yourself? And then who do you see out there as a model, either personally in your life, or just someone you know of, who you feel their energy around that particular aspect is the kind of energy you want to cultivate within yourself, and tap into that, feel that energy, cultivate that within yourself, and see what happens. And I would love to know if, next week's show, if you tune in, let me know how that exercise goes for you. I'd be curious to see, do you actually have some success in that, even in some small, tiny way? So that's my blog post for this week. It's entitled Entrainment is Key to Embodying a New Way of Being. You can always find my blog on talkradio.nyc/blog. And of course, on my personal branded website, theconsciousconsultant.com. And now it is my extreme pleasure to welcome to the show Professor Emeritus and author Christopher M. Bache, Ph.D. Dr. Christopher Bache is Professor Emeritus in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Youngstown State University, where he taught for 33 years. He's also adjunct faculty at the California Institute of Integral Studies, Emeritus Fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and on the advisory board of Grof Legacy Training. Chris's passion has been the study of the philosophical implications of non-ordinary states of consciousness, especially psychedelic ones. An award-winning teacher and international speaker, Chris has written 4 books: Lifecycles, a study of reincarnation in the light of contemporary consciousness research; Dark Night, Early Dawn, a pioneering work in psychedelic philosophy; The Living Classroom, an exploration of collective fields of consciousness in teachings; and his most recent book, LSD and the Mind of the Universe, the story of his 20-year journey with LSD, which we're going to get into in this show. Welcome to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Dr. Bache.
Thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It's wonderful. I've been so looking forward to this. I'm really glad it's already here. So a quick question just to start off, to give our audience a little background. Did you always have sort of this philosophical, spiritual leaning in your life when you were younger, or was it something that kind of came to you more as an adult and because of certain experiences?
No, I think it was always there. From when I was very young, I wanted to be a priest. I don't remember wanting to be
Oh.
anything other than that. I was raised in a Catholic tradition, and that was how spirituality expressed itself in my world. And then later, it continued to change and evolve as I did. But that
Mm.
seems to have been in place right from the very beginning.
Oh, interesting, interesting. And when did this interest in psychedelics and exploring non-ordinary states of consciousness kind of start to make itself present in your life?
Well, it wasn't in college. It wasn't in graduate school. It was
Oh,
after I had finished my graduate work at Brown University, and this was
mm,
1978. And
okay.
I finished in philosophy of religion. And I finished graduate school kind of ironically as an atheistically inclined agnostic.
Uh,
And it was at that point that I met the work of 2 people who really changed my life. The first one was Ian Stevenson and his research on children who have spontaneous memories of a previous life. And
oh,
more importantly, even, was Stanislav Grof. He
ah,
had just published his first book, Realms of the Human Unconscious. And in one reading, I felt like I found my life's calling. And I knew I wanted to do this. I knew that people working in my profession, which was philosophy of religion, who would be making the largest contributions in the near future would be people writing out of an experiential basis, not simply an intellectual basis.
hmm,
And to do that, you had to not only have a few experiences, but you had to undergo a systematic regimen of therapeutically oriented psychedelic work according to the protocols that Stan outlines in his
hmm,
writings, particularly his book, LSD Psychotherapy, where
yeah.
he outlines a low dose protocol and a high dose protocol. Very different. Most of the work being done today, which is therapeutically oriented, would be kind of equivalent to a low dose protocol.
Hmm.
For a variety of reasons, I ended up, after 3 sessions, choosing to work in a high dose protocol. So between when I was 30 and 50 years old, between 1979 and 1999, I ended up doing 73 high dose LSD sessions in a tightly controlled therapeutic modality, traditional, completely isolated from the world, at home or in my wife's professional office, lying down, eye shades, carefully calibrated music to pace the opening and closing of a session so that you would know that whatever you were facing was coming from within.
Mhm.
So that's how I got into it.
Wow, wow. Yeah, Stanislav Grof. I had the wonderful pleasure of meeting him at last year's Psychedelic Sciences conference in Denver and just briefly being able to say hello to him. And he's such a pioneer and his
Really.
work has been so impactful on so many lives. I can understand how finding his work at such an early stage could really have an impact on your life.
Yeah, it
We're
truly
going
did.
to take a quick break. And when we come back, I just want to define for our audience, what do we mean when we say non-ordinary states of consciousness?
Okay.
And then I really want to dive into these 73 high dose sessions of LSD you did, because that ain't normal. Most people would not choose to do that. So I really want to get into why you did that, how you did that, and what sort of revealed itself to you from doing that. Okay?
Yeah.
Wonderful. So, everyone, please stay tuned. You're listening to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity. We do this every Thursday, 12 noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on talkradio.nyc and all over social media and all over the podcasting platforms. And we will be right back with our guest, Dr. Christopher Bache, in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Broncu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
If you don't have your health, what do you really have? It's time to feel good in your body and shift from struggle to ease. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Tripp, your host of Nourish the Soul, where we explore the sacred wisdom of your body while you sit back, relax, and go on a journey of self-discovery. Join me every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to awaken your heart, transform your well-being, and unlock a deeper understanding of yourself.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
And welcome back to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity. Um, so, Dr. Bache, what you read Stanislav Grof's book. You tried LSD. You decided you wanted to go into the sort of a high dose, very therapeutic, very controlled settings. What was it about your initial experiences that made you want to really dive deeper into this?
Well, I had just finished a graduate, my PhD in religious studies. So I had a good solid grasp of theological traditions, Western philosophical traditions. I then progressively got into the study of Eastern traditions, Eastern spirituality.
Mhm.
But I've always had a passionate desire to understand how the universe works. Why are things the way they are?
Mhm.
Is there an intelligence inherent in the universe? Where, if there is, where is this intelligence going? Where is it taking us? So that was my passion. I had studied philosophy and religious studies to address these questions, to explore them. And what I saw in Stan Grof's work was a methodology that allowed us to explore these questions through entering very deep states of consciousness that traditionally are the domain of very advanced meditators or natural
Mhm.
mystics. And here was a technology that would allow an ordinary layman, if they use the processes responsibly and conscientiously, to systematically engage the deep psyche, to
Mhm.
engage the shadow, to clear the material there, and to progressively go deeper and deeper into the deep structure of consciousness, past personal psyche, into the
Mhm.
collective psyche, eventually past the collective psyche into the dimensions that lie beyond, dimensions of consciousness so vast. Some would
Mhm.
call it into the divine mind. I, because divinity is such an overly taxed word in our
Yeah.
theologies with many ambivalent associations, I call it the mind of the universe. It
Mhm.
is the consciousness that is the creative intention, the creative mind within and underneath our beautiful universe.
Wow. Wow. It's so interesting because you're approaching things from just a very um, deep philosophical sense of inquiry, like really being a true pioneer of consciousness. When we talk about this stuff, the term non-ordinary states of consciousness is used a lot. What do we really mean by non-ordinary states of consciousness?
Well, ordinary states of consciousness, or the states of consciousness that you and I are in now, it's very finely attuned to sensory reality. So an ordinary state of consciousness is basically a sensate or sensory state of consciousness. A
Mhm.
non-ordinary state of consciousness is a state of consciousness in which you move beyond the ordinary sensate world. So this might be in meditation, it
Mhm.
might be in hypnotic regression work, it
Mhm.
might be in recovering former life memories, or near-death episodes would be an
Mhm.
example, and psychedelic states would be examples.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Good. I always like to define terms because sometimes we throw
Yeah,
these terms around and we think we know what we're talking about, but sometimes
yeah.
we're not very clear. So, when you dove in to these different levels of consciousness, like as you talked about, like first there's the very personal level, and our traumas and our shadow sort of lives there. How long did it take you to sort of sift through, heal, and get past that personal level into a deeper sense of the collective unconscious?
Well, again, I want to emphasize that I was working with very high doses of LSD. If I were working with lower doses of LSD, more like 50 to 100, 125, it would have peeled more gradually like an onion. But when
Hmm.
you work with very high doses of LSD, it has a tendency to push you to the extremes much faster. I
Hmm.
worked consistently at 500 to 600 micrograms, which is the body's maximum, absorption capacity. And
Ah.
this is a protocol I do not recommend. I honestly, sincerely do not recommend this protocol. Um, it just, now that I know what I know now,
Hmm.
at the end of the journey, I wouldn't do it the same way if I did it again. I would be
Okay.
gentler on myself. I'd work with lower doses. But basically, working the way I did, it took me 10 sessions and 2 years to work through what
Hmm.
Stan calls the perinatal level of consciousness, which is
Okay.
working at the very kind of foundational level of the personal psyche, at the basement of the personal psyche, and the interface of personal going into transpersonal consciousness. Usually
Mm.
this work involves a lot of deep metaphysical anxiety, deep question and probing, purging a lot of emotional tension,
Mhm.
psychological tension, uh, eventually culminating in an ego death experience, or an experience in which your historical identity is basically just shattered.
Mm.
Sometimes melted, but mine was just shattered. It turns out
Mm.
the ego is not that hard. I mean, it's beautiful. It's so complex. It's magnificent, but it's not so hard to break. In my 10th, ninth, and 10th sessions, the universe
Mm.
just snapped me like a twig.
Wow. Wow. Um, so you had been working with it about 2 years by that point.
Mhm.
Um, did you have a regimen or a protocol for what you did in between the sessions to help you to ground and be prepared for the next one?
I did. Um, and I feel this very strongly. If you're going to enter temporary deep states of consciousness, it's very important to have a spiritual regimen that you're
Mm.
doing every day.
Uh,
Because when you open yourself up to such vast territories and huge energies in these states of consciousness, it's really important to have a daily practice that you can come back to again and again to stabilize and help you manage and integrate the experiences and simply
mm.
the energetic states that you're moving into. So I had been a meditator all the way through college and graduate school. Over time, what type of meditation I was doing changed, but it was always there. In time, I integrated yoga into my practice.
Mm.
And partly I was teaching religious studies, for a living. I was kind of talking about these things, uh, doing what the Hindu tradition might call jnana yoga, the
Mm.
yoga of intellectual exercises. Yeah.
Mm. Wonderful. Wonderful. Um, and as you started working your way through this after a couple of years, did you notice things shifting in your life that surprised you? Like were there sort of ancillary, benefits or ancillary consequences of you doing this that surprised you?
Yes, and eventually I wrote a book on one of the major ones, but let me just back up just 1 second.
Sure.
uh, People who work with psychedelics seriously,
Hmm.
uh, I divide it sort of into three projects.
Okay.
One project is therapeutic healing,
Right.
absolutely important. This is the dominant movement of the psychedelic renaissance today. This
Right.
is how we're getting psychedelics back into public discussion. The second area is spiritual awakening, to
Hmm.
awaken to that essential dimension of our own nature, to enter into conscious rapport with the creative intelligence of all life. Both of these are really important. Both of these are addressed in various aspects of the literature. And what I found was my work, eventually I began to understand, was doing something different. At first, I thought
Mm.
it was simply an exercise primarily focused on spiritual awakening. But
Mm.
eventually it went so deep and became so wide, it became an exercise in what I came to think of as cosmological exploration,
Mm.
exploring the deep structure of cosmic reality. Okay,
Mm.
so what happened in this process is that I began to break through one level of reality after ego death, for example, into the collective psyche. And it takes a while to acclimate to each level, new level. Your mind has to adjust to the conceptual parameters of that level, to how the physics of that level are, to the
Mm.
energetics of that level. You have to learn literally how to stabilize yourself in
Mm.
states of consciousness that you've never encountered before. So, for example, when I went through ego death, I began to enter systematically what I came to call deep time. Deep
Mm.
time is not eternity, but it's entering into different spans of time which can be simultaneously present or unfold under a much larger kind of movement of time. So it takes time to learn how to stay conscious in
Yeah.
something like this. But if you keep at it, you learn, you're taught, and then eventually you come up against the limit of that level and you go through yet another cycle of death and rebirth. and are propelled into yet another level of consciousness. And the whole process repeats itself. Different physics, different rules, different reality. And you have to learn how that reality works and operates. And if you keep pushing, sooner or later, you're going to go into yet another level. And when I got to the end of my journey and was kind of, I took 20 years to digest this 20-year journey. I took 20 years before publishing LSD in the Mind of the Universe. And when I was trying to organize the overview, I distinguished 5 basic categories of experience. So one category was the personal mind. Second is the collective mind, or our species mind. Third is archetypal mind. Fourth is causal mind, or the mind of oneness. And the fifth is what I call diamond luminosity. So this broad umbrella categories for describing where the journey went. And that is the most challenging part of even trying to tell the story, because many of our expectations have been influenced by very early important books on psychedelics, which are based upon a much smaller data set. So for example, Aldous Huxley, when he wrote The Doors of Perception in 1954, he had only had one mescaline experience. And later, Houston Smith, when he wrote his collection of essays, life collection of essays on psychedelics, he had only taken cleansing the doors of perception. He had taken psychedelics only 6 times up to that point. And then we have Michael Pollan, whose very important, valuable book on how to change your mind. Michael had only taken psychedelics about a handful of times. That, combined with the personal healing orientation of the contemporary movement, I think, while it's perfectly understandable and perfectly legitimate, tends to shrink our metaphysical horizons, and it can lead us to underestimate the depths to which one can systematically explore if one works in a rigorous way.
And this is why I really wanted to have you on the show, because I've seen like psychedelics as a healing modality is good for certain things, but there's this whole aspect of it as a venue for spiritual development, exploration, and ontological exploration of what the universe really is about, that's largely ignored in the public discourse around psychedelics, because everything is focused on just about the healing aspect work of it, because that's the path towards legalization. And once we get it legalized, well, then we can talk about a whole bunch of other stuff. I have to take my next break. When we come back, I want to go back to the original question I asked you at the beginning, which was, what sort of shifted and changed in your life that maybe surprised you or was unexpected? Like what kind of phenomena maybe happened because of this exploration? Because while it's good to dive deep into really seeing what's the nature of reality, well, let's come back to this reality and it's like, well, how does this affect how we live? Okay. Wonderful. So everyone, please stay tuned. You're listening to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, and we'll be right back with our guest, Dr. Christopher Bache, in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
If you don't have your health, what do you really have? It's time to feel good in your body and shift from struggle to ease. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Tripp, your host of Nourish the Soul, where we explore the sacred wisdom of your body while you sit back, relax, and go on a journey of self-discovery. Join me every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to awaken your heart, transform your well-being, and unlock a deeper understanding of yourself.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
So, Dr. Bache, you've really explored some very deep states of consciousness that are usually reserved for, Buddhist monks who've been meditating a lifetime, or as you mentioned, mystics. You've explored it, shall we say, with an artificial push in a way, right? With the aid of psychedelic medicine. So while you were going through this and you were touching these very deep states of consciousness, were things shifting and changing in your life that surprised you? Was phenomena happening that most people would shock them, that just it just unraveled in front of you because of the work you were doing?
Yeah, and the easiest way to point to, and this what you're asking about, is to point to what was happening on my university campus. Because LSD is and was illegal, I never talked about this work to my students. I kind of divided my life. I was a university professor during the day, and on some weekends, I was a psychonaut doing my own personal, private psychedelic exploration. And I built a firewall between the psychedelic side of my life and the professional side of my life. But over time, I began to realize that my students were being activated by my sessions. When I would go through a major breakthrough, I began to recognize that some of my students were going through kind of parallel kinds of breakthrough in their life, though they had no understanding of the relationship that I was aware of, until eventually things began to happen. Like I would just be lecturing on a world religions course, and I would, in order to make a point I was making, I would think of an example, and I would choose an example out of the clear blue. And students started to come up to me after class and say things like, it's funny you use that example that you did today, because that's exactly what happened to me this week, or that's exactly what happened to my mom. And at first I just kind of dismissed this as coincidence, but it kept happening and it kept happening. And it happened so frequently that I began to have to pay attention to it. And I found that as my personal spiritual journey went deeper and deeper, these synchronicities of transparency not only happened more often, but they began to touch deeper and deeper levels of my students' lives. It was as if their soul was slipping messages to me, telling me where they were hiding, where they were hurting. And so my students it was like there was a permeable membrane that had opened up between my mind and my students' mind. And without even intending it, bits and pieces of information were coming into my thought stream from my students' lives. And this became such a striking part of my teaching that I eventually realized I had to understand what was happening. I had to decide how to protect my students, or did I need to protect them, or how could I harness this energy more effectively, until eventually I developed an entire new approach to teaching. You might think of it as, instead of conventional teaching takes place within an atomistic Newtonian metaphysics, I developed a form of teaching that takes into account a quantum pedagogy. It's what you might think of as a quantum pedagogy,
Mm-hmm.
taking seriously the impact of intentionality. And it wasn't just that there was an energetic resonance or cognitive resonance between my life and my students' lives. I began to understand that there were fields, psychological fields being generated around my courses, and that these fields were growing stronger over time, and they were influencing the quality and the speed of learning taking place in subsequent semesters. So students learning in previous years were actually influencing the learning of students in subsequent years. It's like
Wow.
Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenetic
Big
fields.
fields. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Eventually, I wrote a book called The Living Classroom,
Classroom.
which is about collective fields of consciousness in the classroom. And I wrote this book and published it in 2008. And I didn't talk about psychedelics at all, even though I was done with my psychedelic work, because psychedelics were not the acceptable topic of conversation then. And I wrote this book for educators, and I didn't want psychedelics to get in the way. But now, after LSD in the Mind of the Universe came out, and I'm kind of out of the psychedelic closet, SUNY Press is bringing out a new edition, a second edition of The Living Classroom. And this time they invited me to let psychedelics be part of the story. So now, starting in this book in December, I'm telling the story of how psychedelics manifested this kind of synchronistic resonances with my students, and what it taught me, what my experiences were teaching me about group fields and the dynamics of group fields in groups, not just in educational settings, but these are fields gather wherever people gather with focused intention, and by improving the quality and the focus of one's intentionality, you can strengthen those fields.
Hence the whole idea of entrainment, where I started with my blog post this morning, that and it's something that I've heard for many years, that a facilitator who's doing this work can only take the clients they're working with as deep as they have gone themselves.
Yeah.
But it's almost like you're taking turning the whole paradigm on its head, that it's not about this what the students do, but it's about what the teacher does. And the deeper the teacher goes into their understanding of the material, of the experience, that those people who come to them are going to entrain to that, and will also kind of deepen their work in the same vein.
Yes, if they are receptive to the influence, there is a spontaneous resonance which is established between someone who has gone deeper and activated certain clarified states of consciousness, and someone who has the appetite for or the interest in and is receptive to that type of resonance. And this is well recognized in the spiritual traditions and in the Taoist tradition in particular. There is a parallel resonance that is established.
How did this 20-year experience of working with high doses of LSD and taking you really deep into the fabric of the consciousness of the universe, how did it affect your own sense of spirituality, or your own belief of what is?
Well, these are large questions you're answering, and it would take a long time to answer that question. When you go as deep as I went in my journey, which took me far beyond space-time reality multiple times, it lifted me into a global perspective, and then transcending a human evolutionary perspective. It leads you to have a deep appreciation for the spiritual geniuses of history, while at the same time transcending all historical frameworks for understanding spirituality. It's kind of like and I want to emphasize that there's a very big difference between contemplative practice and psychedelic practice, which gives you temporary access. And temporary access is not the same as abiding access. And the great spiritual teachers, the great masters are always my guiding light. And abiding access is a much deeper stabilization than temporary access.
Yeah.
But even to have temporary access gives you a profound sense of appreciation of the universal themes of spiritual traditions and the relativity of all of these spiritual traditions. And it opens you up to an evolutionary perspective which reaches into the future millions, billions of years, so that you begin to see everything which is manifesting or has manifested up to now, is manifesting now, is moving towards a crescendo of where we're going in the next phase of human evolution, which is one of the big surprises for me, because I started this work thinking this was about personal transformation. And I got drawn so frequently and so many times into the human story, in the story of our human evolution, and then began to be given downloads into this evolutionary pivot that I was shown that we are in the process of making and giving birth to what I call the birth of the future human. That completely surprised me, because I wasn't expecting anything of that scale and scope to emerge in this work.
Wow. Wow. I could talk to you for hours. I got to take one more break.
Yeah.
When we come back, there are just a couple of things I want to touch upon. Hopefully we have enough time. I do want to touch upon life cycles and your view on reincarnation. And then I want to touch upon where this experiences have shown you where we're going as a human species, because we're at such a chaotic time right now. There's a lot of fear, a lot of anguish, and I'm curious your perspective on where this is all going. Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So everyone, please stay tuned. You're listening to the Conscious Consultant Hour, and we'll be right back to sum it all up with our guest, Christopher M. Bache. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
So another deep question for you. Where did reincarnation, because you wrote a book, Lifecycles, all about reincarnation and how it relates to the latest of what we know about consciousness. How did that kind of come about, and where do you see sort of reincarnation fitting in with all of this that we've been talking about today?
Came about when I first encountered Ian Stevenson's research, university professor at the University of Virginia. And I think he is often thought to be the sort of Charles Darwin of reincarnation thinking. Basically, as a philosopher, I'm absolutely convinced that the case for reincarnation, the evidence for reincarnation is overwhelming today. We have lots and lots, hundreds and hundreds of cases, both spontaneous memories of spontaneous, cases of spontaneous memories in children, cases in past life regression therapy, very powerful modalities of therapy. This evidence didn't exist 50 years ago. But today it's in abundance, and it's sufficiently critically sifted that we have sufficient evidence, I think, that we can say that reincarnation is just simply a fact of life. It's like plate tectonics in geology. It was always there, but we couldn't see it until we came to understand certain things. Reincarnation is a similar ground shifting impact. Once you see it, once you understand that every human being you see has been evolving and reincarnating for goodness knows how long, it changes your understanding of what the dynamic of life is all about.
Right.
Classically, in the Eastern traditions, the basic vision is that you reincarnate, you grow and grow and grow, and you activate various chakras, and you become kinder, more intuitive, more enlightened, until eventually you achieve a breakthrough to a level of consciousness which you recognize that your individual essence is identical to the essence of everything which exists. Atman equals Brahman, or some nirvana experience. Once you achieve that, then you can leave time and space. That's the purpose of the exercise, is to get out of town. These are all up and out cosmologies which all came into being about 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. In my experience, in my sessions, that's not what I was shown. And I understand that interpretation. It makes perfectly good sense given where we were when that theory came in about 4,000 years ago. But now that we understand how big the universe is, how old it is, how intelligent it is, how many complex layers of life are involved, I think it doesn't strike us as intuitively correct that just when you begin to realize what you are and who you are, that you would then want to leave this. And I think what was shown in my work was, I reached a point in my work where on one particular session, I began to integrate all my former lives. They were coming into me very fast. And I had done past life therapy before. I was familiar with some, but these were all coming in together. And then it was as if they hit a critical mass and they fused. And when they fused into one, there was an explosion of energy, an explosion of diamond light out of my heart. And it catapulted me into an unprecedented state of awareness in which I was an individual, but not an individual within any frame of reference that I had known before. And I think what it was giving me was a glimpse of where reincarnation is taking us, not only individually, but as a species. That we have been growing and growing and growing and growing, and now we are in the process of beginning to integrate all of our past lives, all the karma of those lives, all the suffering and pain of those lives, and we are literally bringing together, clearing them, and when they eventually fuse, it gives birth to a consciousness which isn't simply an enlightened consciousness. It is an enlightened soul consciousness, where inside the body, we experience ourselves as being not a 100-year-old being, or even a 100-year-old enlightened being, but a 100,000-year-old being. And I think that the form that the future human is going to take, this revolutionary pivot that we're in the process of making, is precisely the diamond soul. I think the form of our future self is implicit once you understand the evolutionary process that we've been involved in. So, like biological birth, gestation is long. Labor is short, dangerous, and intense. I think we've been gestating the future human for hundreds of thousands of years. Now we are entering labor. Labor is dangerous, it's turbulent. We can no longer afford the luxury of trying to live on this planet in egoic states of consciousness. We must give birth to the soul if we're going to survive the perilous confrontation that we are coming into.
Um, Given the state of where we are and the sort of anxiety where people are, do you have a sense of what's going to happen? A lot of people are very concerned about the climate change, the ecological disaster, about this division, the violence. Everything seems to be going crazy right now during labor. Is this going to be a stillbirth, or are we going to make it through the canal?
I think it's going to be a birth, a magnificent birth. There's a whole chapter in my book called The Birth of the Future Human. And in it, I lay out the visions that were given to me about this extraordinary spiritual awakening that's taking place in the collective psyche. But I also give the experience that happened to me in '95 of the death and rebirth of humanity. And the basic picture that emerges there is that we are entering a period of profound deconstruction, destabilization, a global systems crisis, the likes of which history has never seen before. And it seemed to be precipitated by a cascading series of ecological crises of, again, historically unprecedented magnitudes. A series of crises that will push us to our breaking point, and until we are really confronting just the bare necessity of survival. So a very painful, very disruptive period, a hard period. And I think you can understand if we are going into a period of economic and survival necessity, it's going to precipitate tremendous social upheaval, polarization of politics, political opinions, a lot of conflict nationally as well as internationally. But my experience is that we do make it through this crisis, that we come to a point where literally we are broken down. And when we begin, the crisis begins to ease. And when we begin to pick ourselves up and begin to put the pieces together again, we find that we are changed. We have something has been opened inside us by the intensity and depth of this crisis, that we literally begin to emerge with new sets of values, new sets of functions, new social organizations, and creativity cascades upon creativity. And we are transitioning into a new future. And it's not simply a new economic future or a new psychological future. I think we are facing a shift in the plate tectonics of the collective psyche, so that all generations born after we make this transition will be operating in the matrix of a different collective psyche than we are operating in now. It didn't give me a lot of details. It didn't tell me exactly how. It didn't show me when. I don't have any of that information. But in those experiences and in subsequent experiences where I was taken deeper into deep time and experienced the future human from the future perspective, I am personally absolutely convinced that we do make it. But it's going to take all of our resources and all of us working as hard as we can to make it through this transition. My concern is not, do we fail? I can't help. I know that we make it through. My concern is how many of our children and grandchildren are going to die before we come to our spiritual senses.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we have to leave it there, Dr. Bache. I literally, I could talk to you all day long around these topics. It's for me so fascinating, and I really want to bring more emphasis on sort of the spiritual side of using these substances as a way of breaking through the way we've always been to come to a new way of being, which is hopefully the future human. And before I forget, I would be neglectful of my duty if I didn't mention that Christopher Bache comes to me from the because he's going to be speaking at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, which is spiritplantmedicine.com, which happens in person in Vancouver and virtually, so you can tune in virtually. And I have a special coupon code for my audience. TCC for The Conscious Consultant, all capital, TCC 2024, and you'll get a 35% discount. Dr. Bache.
I want to say this is a wonderful conference. It's my favorite psychedelic conference. It's very intimate. It's a smallish group. It's not like God Bless Maps, great, and Denver 13,000. It's not like that. It's a very interesting, committed group of practitioners of psychedelic therapy and psychedelic arts.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And if people want to learn more about you, do you have a personal website, Dr. Bache?
chrisbache.com. I'm not keeping it quite up to date, but yeah, chrisbache.com. People can contact me through that.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Bache. I truly appreciate you. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, and I'd be happy to have you come back on anytime in the future. If you have any new books coming out or new editions, contact me. We'll get you back on the show, okay?
Okay. My pleasure, Sam. Thank you very much for our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And of course, thank you, my loyal listeners, for tuning in every week. Without you, there is no show. And of course, if you missed any part of today's show, you can always catch the replay on talkradio.nyc and on all the major podcasting platforms, Apple, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find The Conscious Consultant Hour. Thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you all next week.